So I'm going to talk a little bit about, sort of obviously hosting the games, etc. But I think given the context of what people were talking about earlier, there's a lot of relevance to all those infrastructure projects that were happening and how we're kind of coordinating it. So coordination's a big theme that came together. I think the Commonwealth Games acted as a focus for bringing people and those organisations together. And equally, some of the discussions earlier were talking about identity as well. Now, Birmingham and the West Midlands in the UK hasn't always traditionally had the best reputation, certainly within the UK itself, but we've kind of come out of it a lot more prouder about who we are and what we were able to put on in that time period. So going to run through some of the things that we did. I'm going to talk about specifically Transport for West Midlands, so different context again, different kind of way that we organise government, so it's helpful to understand who we are, what we do, the games itself and our role during the games. Come back to that idea of collaboration sort of thing, and then how that fitted into our pre-games planning using data and our thing called the data engine. I think something you'll be really interested in is the Regional Transport Coordination Centre, and again, that word coordination is there. Used during operations time, but was something that was in place prior to the games itself because of all the infrastructure projects that were happening. And then ultimately the legacy, what have we learned, what are we taking forward, and what can we build on for the future? So in terms of Transport for West Midlands, it's specifically West Midlands, whilst it was Birmingham 2022. Birmingham's one of the three main cities in the West Midlands, the others being Wolverhampton, Coventry, region of around about 3 million people. We've got kind of a complicated political setup. There's a Metro Mayor, we report into him, but we work in partnership with 7 local authorities who are like the highways, local highways authorities, and then there's national bodies who look after rail, who look after the motorway network, etc. So it's quite complicated the way we've got to get people working together to try and help people around the transport network. We crucially are different to Transport for London, so everyone kind of compares most city areas to London. London has a regulated market. Everywhere else in the UK was deregulated in the 1980s, so it's privatised transport. So we don't actually own, operate, run any of the transport. So therefore we see ourselves as the voice of the people who are using the transport system. We often see cases where there are people who move from one part of the transport network to the other. They're not interested in who's actually operating, running it. It's all got to be fairly seamless. So that's where we come into play. And that's allowed us to introduce things like the Swift card, so similar to London's Oyster card or some of the equivalents that you've got over here in Australia, enabling people to move around multimodally, etc., that kind of thing. So we do have some kind of oversight on the transport network. We have responsibilities around safety on the transport network, and then we're helping people to move around as well. So in terms of Birmingham 2022, I know you all know lots about it because once again you topped the medal table sort of thing. So even though we got to pick some sports, it turns out you were quite good at those as well, unfortunately for us. There were 19 sports in total, and I think it's worth sort of noting that there were lots of different venues and things, which we'll come on to at the moment. But as one of the things we're proudest of is we delivered those 19 sports under an immense amount of pressure, a lot of challenges. First of all, we had only had 4.5 years to actually deliver the whole Commonwealth Games. We stepped in after Durban dropped out. Then about a year or two into it, you had this thing called COVID start to kick in. We then had our whole tram network was broken, similar to the sort of stuff that was going on in Sydney, the kind of same thing that was happening to us as well. Then obviously you get kind of like the rise in terms of costs, and then there's the war started in Ukraine, etc., just before that. So it was affecting the way that we were going to actually have to put together and deliver the games itself. So still the same 19 sports were delivered, but in a fundamentally different way to what a lot of games had been done before. We had to repurpose and reutilise lots of venues that we already had in place. We couldn't build new stuff. Only one new venue was built, the Aquatic Centre. Everything else was refreshed and upgraded, and then it had to be kind of set up ready for the games. There wasn't one central athletes village, so they all kind of like this, the athletes, but we weren't able to complete it in time because, again, of the impacts of COVID on the construction industry. So we distributed the athletes to different areas. probably about a year or so into our transport modelling, where we've been basing it on moving them around from one particular bit. So we had to start doing all those pieces of work all over again. In fact, there were about 15 venues in total, and that's also across not just the West Midlands, but the likes of London as well, reutilising their velodrome. So in terms of how kind of successful it was, there was over 1.5 million tickets sold, which is now the most that's been sold at any kind of Commonwealth Games compared to previously. Two areas that are really important: the biggest integrated para-sport programme. So that wasn't just the kind of thing to hold up and be proud of. It had genuine implications on how we plan the transport to support that. So not just getting the competitors there, but also people who are supporting them in their family, peer groups, etc. And for any kind of spectator who got any particular accessibility needs on the transport network itself. More women's medals than men's. Now, we've got a big thing in the UK at the moment around violence against women and girls, really trying to identify how people who use the transport network are negatively impacted in the way that those networks have been designed. So we had to take into account, again, not just moving more women athletes around, but the spectators, family groups, etc., and really respect their needs in terms of the transport planning. Specifically our role, so depending if anyone here has worked on the Gold Coast Games previously, there's lots of different aspects to the transport planning side of it. We were looking after the spectators and workforce only, not the troublesome athletes and umpires and all the kind of VIPs who've come from all over the world. We were just concentrating on the people who were there to help make the games happen and to enjoy spectating as well. We were set some challenges by our politicians. So first of all, unlike previous multi-sport games, they wanted us to undertake travel demand management that didn't discourage background demand. Effectively, people who would normally go into the various city centres and so on and so forth, we still wanted them to come in and spend their money. We didn't want to discourage people from continuing on what they would normally do if they weren't into the sports side of things. We also had a big focus on trying to make it the most green and sustainable game, so therefore a big emphasis on public transport. In our case, we're from a big car region, so a lot of that was going to be shuttle buses, those sorts of things. We've got some trains, we've got the trams, which we've got working in time. We also set up free bike use on our hire bike schemes, and also set up a lot more cycle parking as well, and encourage people to move around in different ways. But fundamentally it came back to the shuttle buses that we used, and that proved to be quite useful given the fact that, just to add to all the complexity, the rail strikes happened all through the games as well, so that took out another piece of our infrastructure. In terms of the pre-games planning then, and again coming back to the ideas of collaboration, coordination, organisations working together, there were a number of different people that we had to work with to make this happen, and a big part of that was data sharing, to ensure that we're all looking at exactly the same pieces of information so that the correct decisions are made at the right time. It's a massive undertaking, mostly involving a dedicated data custodian, librarian, who is ensuring that the data is correct, that the people use from the different organisations. They worked across those organisations so that we could either accept their data if they didn't have any particular in-house capabilities, or conversely just to ensure they were using the data, etc., in the right way. That one person was able to manage it all thanks to the help of quite a bit of technology to support that. So we set up very quickly, built on some existing capabilities. We already used the Esri ArcGIS system. We set up a hub site. So this was really the focal point for people to go to. Lists out the data that you could get access to. It gave you the opportunity to sign up. The whole thing was still user controlled because the data was considered sensitive in a lot of cases for obvious security reasons, but also for many other reasons as well. So we had to manage the version control, had to manage user access, roles, responsibilities, and stay on top of that. And that was all done through that hub site. People could just click on there, sign up, and then run through their rationale for having access to certain data sets. Once they're set up, they then get full access to the site, so they can go into this sort of side panel and they can have a look at the thrilling world of data catalogues and metadata. Really important because it does tell you the version numbers, etc., but at least it gives you a full history of what's there, what you can do with it, all those sorts of things. And again, really important part of the hub site, if they weren't too sure what they're able to read, you could click on it and see what that was. In this particular case, the games route network with all the information on the left-hand side. What they could also do as well was then get access to that data in a variety of different ways. You could download it, so if you've got some of the systems locally that you can load it into your own system, I appreciate you lose a little bit of control at that point in time, but we do need to work with different systems that aren't necessarily going to allow a live link. You can still get live links as well, so there's a full API side of things for sharing data. People could connect to the latest version and know that they were looking at the latest data itself. And of course, you always need to get things into Excel because the world runs on Excel. We equally understand that not everybody's got full data and GIS applications and capabilities, so therefore those who just needed to see what was happening, understand a little bit about the information itself, you can create inbuilt applications in it again. So the people that I had doing this aren't technical specialists. They're my analysts team, they're not web developers, they just put the information together. They knew what they were doing with the data, but the system itself took care of the rest really, and they could put the information on for people to have a look at. In this case, learn about the local area traffic management plans. There was a ton of acronyms this morning, by the way, and I thought I'll throw even more at you through games-related stuff as well. GRNs, STNs, LATMPs, it's all there. So yeah, this was the local area traffic management plans. Which roads are going to be closed, when they're closed till, what kind of access local residents could get, and that would then be used in public consultations, working with local businesses, residents, that sort of thing. I'd mentioned earlier about this concept of the data engine. We call it the data engine. It's all the information behind the scenes. It's not just purely GIS information. It's loads and loads of other information we have. Effectively, it's the big circle I draw when I'm talking to the senior sort of leaders at our place who have no interest in IT and technology itself, but they do quite like the fact that we are maximising the use of the data that we get collectively into the data engine. We work with lots of different partners, public, private sector, third sector, and then equally we've got some quite innovative collaborations with the likes of Waze and so on, so we can get a real view of what's happening on the transport network in real or near to real time. We get the latest information where people are undertaking construction works, those sorts of things as well. So I think it's really important to build those relationships with any of the infrastructure partners who are developing things and building things on your behalf, so that you can, again, continue to make the right decisions and see what's happening. This particular thing came out of the fact that in and around the West Midlands, you've got lots of existing infrastructure being built, and some of it all very much co-located at the same time. In and around Birmingham Airport, there is high-speed 2 rail, there is upgrades to motorway junctions, there is Jaguar Land Rover's main production plant, and if you get any kind of a disruption on the network, 1 hour lost on Jaguar Land Rover's production plant costs them £5 million. And don't even get me started on the people who are going to see the dog show Crufts. They can really complain if they don't get there on time. We combine lots of data and information together in that pre-planning. So all that data coming in real time is stored. We used it in our transport modelling. We used it in some Excel models. We had 3 different ways of modelling people coming in from different parts of the region and the sorts of different transport they were going to use. And we needed to make that available to all of the people working on the games. We chose online tools. We used a combination of Power BI and the Esri GIS suite to do that, mainly so we weren't continually having to refresh PDFs, etc., those kind of things, because that can take a heck of a long time. And it also allowed us to narrow down the particular access that people needed, dependent upon their job. So in this particular case, the simplistic demand forecasting in terms of looking at the venue, the day, the type of transport that people will be arriving by, the number of spectators, workforce, etc., they could see at a very high level so that they can at least know what's going on, make some other plans, see other things on that same day that are the events that are happening across the whole kind of West Midlands. And then I think the video should move on to showing a bit more. Let's have a quick look. Coming down to it, I was going a bit slow on that part. There we go. So yeah, this is effectively showing the most crucial thing during operations time, but all based around the pre-planning, the ingress and egress times, so that you can start to see the flow of people in, flow of people out, where there's inevitable kind of clashes of those things happening. And then that's really crucial during the operations bit to see whether those curves are shifting left or right. If there's been problems on the transport network, is it going to affect what's actually happening in terms of people getting in? And ultimately, are we going to irritate the TV companies if there's going to be a delay to any events happening? Again, continually updated schedules, people getting the latest sort of source of information. They were all able to go on and find this really, really useful in terms of a kind of timeline of what was happening, really break it down for people. And this is just really to show that integration between different systems, nothing particularly fancy. Again, just people in my team who aren't web developers, they're just embedding bits of difference analysis. So in this particular case, moving away from the graph side of stuff onto the map sort of thing, where you're looking at the number and volume of vehicles using parts of the games route network. So that's the very important kind of route network chosen, where we've got a service level agreement with the organising committee that is about getting the workforce and the athletes, etc., to the venues in a specific amount of time. So it's really important that we obviously don't break the SLAs and that we do all that kind of forward planning so we can identify any potential mitigations that were needed, which could consist of variable message signs. It could look at rejigging some of the signal phasing and timings, and it could also be working with other events and promoters, things that were happening at the same time. We had a whole project coordination group using all these tools to look through what was happening. So then we move on to the actual operations. We've done all that kind of pre-planning, and effectively within the operations side of things, we'd built this thing called the Regional Transport Coordination Centre. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, the RTCC, but fundamentally it was an existing space we had for safety management on the public transport network specifically. So there was a wealth of CCTV cameras, and we decided we needed to enhance that space primarily for all those other construction projects, the stuff I'd mentioned earlier. So it started way back in 2018 as a result of our congestion management plan. It was brought into place. It started to grow. We very quickly demonstrated the idea of what we could do with the data and then built on that right through to certainly 2020, when at the start of the year we suffered flooding in and around our transport network, so we were able to stand it up early in order to get the coordination between different transport operators in terms of what was happening in and around that flooding, move people into the network, or just tell them, actually, you're not going to get transport at the moment, stay and have a coffee or a beer somewhere, or whatever it may be, or look for Uber or something along those lines. 2020, it got stood up because of the reduction in use of transport once we went into lockdown, etc. So pretty much from 2020 right through to 2022, it's been in constant use. So inevitably, we were able to get a ministerial visit just before that lockdown, so we managed to get a good photo shoot anyway. So to give you a feel of how that actual venue is, it sits within our particularly ugly, typical public transport offices sort of thing, but it looks better when you've got a load of screens and you're walking through with lockdown hair and lockdown beard. We've got all the kind of CCTV, as I say, for different purposes there. One of the things we were able to do was connect software up to that existing CCTV and count people who were at bus interchanges, on railway station platforms, etc., that sort of thing, so that we could take advantage of existing investment. We added to it with what we were doing with our data and digital side of stuff, with the big wall with what was going on. And whilst I kind of like the physical space, one of my main involvements with this project, because we're in the data digital team, is less in the physical and more in the kind of virtual world. That same dashboard is available for us to share with the partners. So all those partners who are giving us data, or we've connected to for data, and we've developed data sharing agreements, we give them access to this back. So they've got a holistic view of the transport network in real time. Really, really helpful. You can see across the top all the kind of numbers of disruptions that are being experienced, so simple for our operations staff to see what's going on. Along the left-hand side, you can start to zoom into very specific things that you've seen on the map or that are ordered according to things like journey time impacts, etc. So in this particular case, as we're sort of working through some particular problems, there's a kind of towards the, it'll zoom in at the moment, that kind of red data there, that was picked up via Waze. It's in and around that Jaguar Land Rover plant, so it's potentially got some problems with it. It's actually, in this case, to do with a football match that was a kick out at the same time as the Land Rover shift workers, so it's kind of all that clash of people coming together. We've picked up that information, and because you can add in lots of layers of data, our duty managers in these operation centres, they don't trust data. They've not worked with it as much as I would probably like them to have done. We've put on there some of the cameras that we've got in and around the area, because inevitably they need that extra bit of understanding so they can build up trust. And that's one of the big things out of this collaboration, coordination, building up trust with data partners, building up trust with the people who are using the tools that you put into their hands, so that they know that what they're looking at is exactly what they need. I think it's also important to stress the fact that it's still a human thing in the end. As much as this tools technology is fantastic, we do have to take people on that journey. So I'm still thinking that we need to build up that an element of understanding, particularly when we were working in the RTCC itself. What is that data showing us before we go into this whole new world of full automation? I think, for example, with this kind of red, amber, green sort of thing that we had for the network, we have not automated that at the moment. We're basing that on human decision making. In and around games time, we'd go around each desk that was in the RTCC and saying, how's your part of the network performing? And we'd update that manually at the moment, sort of thing, just because it was far more sensible to get that human judgment in terms of what was happening on the network. But the learnings from that are helping us then to apply automations in the future. And then slowly over time, we can chip away at bits of tasks that people have, automate that and allow them to do more in terms of their particular jobs itself. The reason why I put this kind of thing up there is to stress around the fact that the Waze Irregularities was a fantastic piece of data for us to use. We automated it into emails. Again, a lot of senior executives and so on and other people who don't have time to look at dashboards, they just need a simple, comprehensive amount of information sent to them. Automated all into the email and then fired over to them with a bit of supporting commentary. Predominantly what my team did during games time was just chasing people up to write bits of commentary sort of stuff. The rest of the data was automated into the reporting systems themselves. The fact that we got that kind of operations dashboard then meant that we could really easily spin up very specific views for different teams again. So going back to that idea previously where we were making sure that they only had the tools they needed to do their jobs, in this particular case we were putting that same live view of the data for the games route network and the spectator transport network. So only those who were concentrating on those particular routes, who had the SLAs to adhere to, knew exactly what was going on and what might interfere with any particular plans they had, and consequently determine any mitigations that might need to take place. We had a couple of different mad things. One was there was a factory with an illegal cannabis factory in there sort of thing, went up on fire, so we had to move the athletes in and around a particular alternative games route network. And then secondly, there was a big truck that decided just to park up on the games route network in order to pick up any other broken down trucks. So fortunately the police were our friends during that particular those incidents. Because of the fact you can add in specific layers, etc., we'd captured stuff like the marathon day closures. Now, that was our biggest issue, I think, and worry ahead of the games. Because of COVID and the impact on the sporting calendar, the marathon didn't take place till a Saturday. Normally they're on a Sunday in order to make sure that that's when roads are quieter, etc., those sorts of things. But because of the availability of the athletes, we had to move it to a Saturday. Bear in mind what the politicians had set us, that we had to ensure that the background demand was well served, etc. as well. So this was really that kind of clash that we weren't looking forward to. Fortunately, the day went off really well, and in fact, more people coming in helped a lot of those sort of restaurant owners, bar owners, shopkeepers take some really good sort of amounts of money as a result of all that kind of additional footfall coming through the centre anyway. So we think it's something that may well be looked at in the future, even though it's very nerve-wracking for us sort of urban sort of transport planners. Last thing I think really to say in terms of what we did with the data, we were able to then store it all behind the scenes, all still part of that data engine, the real time, and churn out a lot of the kind of impact analysis information. So identifying where problems were through an incident management system, comparing them to the impacts on the network, and in particular comparing it to the predicted times. So this graph, for example, shows the blue as the actual journey times, and the orange or red is the predicted journey times, where we'd set up Waze monitoring along certain routes. We didn't have to put any extra sensors out. You could just set it up from the desktop, capture that data, store it, and then visualize it for people to use the impact. And we combine that all together again. I mentioned it earlier, the automation of reports. We've done this through Power BI because effectively we could produce a nice PDF for it at the end of the day that goes out to people. I'm not going to knock Excel and PDFs. They are still the lifeblood of everything that we work on in the public sector. But at least we've made our lives a bit easier by automating everything into those particular impact analysis graphs, etc. So we've done a heck of a lot of work. I think it's safe to say the pre-work was really, really helpful. the advantage of having a positive event like the Games meant we accelerated some of the analysis and so on that we're doing, which means that we've now got into a position where we've got a comprehensive approach to managing events. And by that, I mean not just sporting events or those kind of events, but all that other impacts from construction that's happening on the network. So we can see what's happening, we can work with partners, and we can do a lot more analysis and try and identify and learn lessons about the way to do things in the future. And in particular, it's really helping an important lever that we use, which is our travel demand management, so that we make sure there's focused customer communications. That's really, really helpful. The partner collaboration, now it's interesting, we were just coming out of our kind of COVID lockdown really when Commonwealth Games came into being, so some of that face-to-face being in the same room has created relationships that for life. I think it's a really important thing. As much as me and my team, because we're data geeks and we are quite happy to sit at home and work on our computers, some of the long-lasting relationships that we've developed out of that were amazing. Use of the tools has proved that we've got trustful ways of working with data now, so that we're going to take that forward. We'd still like to get more up-to-date CAD plans and things like that from some of our infrastructure partners, but at least we're starting to develop a track record now of trust, and therefore that makes it easier to unlock access to data in the future and therefore make better decisions. But that's a fantastic thing to take forward. And then crucially for me, exploiting the data. We capture it once at operations time, but then we use it in performance statistics. We aggregate it together for our business case development. One of the major parts of my team is about developing the business cases for future infrastructure investment. And then we also use it in our customer and partner communications. So in this case, again, built on top of the Esri GIS platform, you can quickly build story maps, which is a way of working through data in a human readable way. It's telling people this is how the roads are going to be closed around where you live, for example, as a result of this event occurring, that sort of thing. They don't have to read dashboards, they don't have to be able to do that, but it's interactive and walks people through, so we embed those into our website. So I guess in summary, ultimately, it was successful. I wouldn't be here telling you about it if it hadn't worked. I'd have been running a mile, I think, to say the least. We used a lot of the data repeatedly, which kept costs low. We used a lot of our existing platforms, kept costs low, and ultimately that has led to us having a £60 million underspend on the Commonwealth Games, which is now being fed back into legacy projects in and around the West Midlands. And I think it's that bit that I'm really proud of what me and the team have been able to achieve. I have to say, having all those tools in place and having some expertise, both in my team and supported by those guys, has really helped push this forward. So thank you to Esri Partners. There we go.